Welcome back to week 4 of starting your small business. Now, we have to apologize. It turns out we're recording on the same day of the week that we did last time. So it turns out this is my Thursday shirt.
Thursday sweater.
Yeah, that's how we roll here. We're here to talk to you about starting your small business in week 4. And as I said last week, this one's going to be understanding the price and costs. Now, I made a comment that there's really no relationship between price and cost. Had you ever heard that before?
I have not, but it's obviously true.
You think it'd be true, right? But you ask people, well, how much are you going to charge? And what was the first thing they'll tell you? What's one of the first rules of thumb people will say for setting a price? Do you have any thoughts what people say?
I just know a lot of people usually look at cost and then add some sort of multiplier on top of it.
Yeah, they'll double it,
Yeah.
or they'll triple it. They'll say, it cost me $20, I'm going to charge $40.
Right.
Or it cost me $20, so I'm going to charge $25. And so they just figure out what it costs and then add it on top. The reality of it is your price is what people will pay. And your cost is what you had to pay. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how you understand both of those, because just because somebody will buy what you have doesn't mean they'll pay what it cost you to make it. And just because they'll pay twice the cost doesn't mean they won't pay 5 times the cost. So how do we go about finding the right cost? Now, this goes back to what we talked about before. You've identified the analysis piece as very, very important. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about the importance of the next piece, right? That action piece.
Yes.
Well, if we don't understand and do the analysis piece, if we don't work through the idea and the analysis to understand the price people will pay compared to what it's going to cost us, we're going to find that whatever action we take will lead to failure. Now, as we dive into price, we talk about what is your big idea worth. And this is where it really gets kind of tough, because as you said, people will look at the cost and they'll add a percentage or they're a multiplier.
Yep.
And they'll say, well, it's 2x. I'm going to charge twice. Wholesale is automatically 50% of what I normally charge retail. I mean, these are weird metrics. I mean, how do we come up with this? The reality of it is, this is where an economist friend of mine taught me this. He says, price and cost are completely unrelated. Price is what people are willing to pay. And you should be willing to charge what people are willing to pay, because that's the value that they're putting on your product. And when you have the value on that product, that they're saying, this is worth $100 to me. And you go, no, $30. Part of our educational process for us is helping other businesses understand the value. So that means doing the things you were talking about before. And
right.
you've talked about researching, and so take the time to learn. We call it what the market will bear. What is the market willing to pay?
Yeah.
Now, what do you, when it comes to buying a car, given everything about you, not if in a perfect world we have $1 million,
right,
or $1 billion or whatever.
Sure.
When you go to buy a car, though, what are the things that constrain your purchase and that lead you to a price point?
For me, in making a decision about a car, it's very price conscious given my family situation. You know, we have 2 young children, and my wife is doing the harder work of working at home with those children. So finances are something that we look at as important. We went through this scenario actually ourselves not too long ago, and making the decision on, hey, large SUV, minivan. You run those and you say, hey, both fulfill a need in terms of, this is getting at pricing and what I would be willing to pay to solve my problem, namely being kids and stuff don't fit in our cars. Both a large SUV and a minivan fit those ends, but minivan is going to do it at a much discounted rate. So where are we drawing towards? Minivan.
Odds are pretty good. You're going to be looking in the realm of a Toyota or a Chevy or a Dodge. I mean, I'm not asking you what did you decide on,
Sure.
But you're going to be looking at those kind of mid-range manufacturers.
Yes.
You're not looking at it going, you know what, I know it's going to be tough on us, but we should get a BMW minivan.
Right.
It's a great vehicle, and there's a market for those, and there's a market for those at that higher price point where people put a value on either the name or the brand or perceived value. Mm-hmm. and maintenance costs. It's
Yes.
a lot more expensive to fix in one of those, but you fix them far less frequently, it's perceived.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the reason I bring this up, and I wanted to hear you talk about that process, is you are a market for something in a larger market.
Yep.
But you represent one of those niches we talked about. And so understanding what customers are out there and what customers are willing to pay for which part of it, and then we have to decide where we want our product to be.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to pay for Starbucks coffee, is that what you want to pay for? What is it about Starbucks that leads you to pay a Starbucks price? And if you have a coffee shop in town, what leads you to buy coffee at that local coffee shop? Do you put a price or premium on buying local as a customer? Do you put a premium on buying fresh roasted, and so you pay a little more for someone who's more artisanal in your community that does fresh roasted coffee? Now here's where I could talk about at least 3 artisanal roasters in Williamsport that have different price points based on the markets that they serve. And so understanding where you are, you don't have to worry about pricing yourself out of a market unless that happens to be the customer you're trying to reach. So never be afraid to look at a higher price or a lower price. Be afraid of not understanding why you picked that price.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and to use your example, for those 3 artisanal roasters in Williamsport, the customers are not going to know the costs associated for each of those, and the scales, they might all be the same. I'm not saying they are, but they might all be the same. For me as a customer, I have no idea. And that's why you brought up the importance of that those are a disconnect, and understanding that is the first step in setting your price.
And this plays through no matter what your business is. If your business is a restaurant, what type of restaurant do you want to be? Are you going to be, we mentioned steakhouses, are you going to be a chain steakhouse, or you want to be a fancy, nice restaurant where people are going to want to go for Valentine's Day or for an anniversary or a birthday or something? Very different types of restaurants serving the same type of meal, and the cost structure may be relatively similar, but the experience is what people are going to charge for. And so understanding your business, and we talk about getting it right, in this case, can be the difference between success and failure. If you underprice something that customers believe should have a higher value, you may not get the customer. And that sounds counterintuitive. But we've seen many, many businesses where they don't understand the greater value that customers put on it. And so when a customer sees something that the customer thinks this is a $400 piece of furniture, handcrafted furniture, and you charge $150 for it, you know what the customers, they've told us this, what the customers are thinking is, what's wrong with it? Why are you only charging $150? What am I missing here?
Yeah.
And we've talked to businesses and we work with businesses that through thought and analysis have raised their prices and seen sales increase. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's going to be the magic that happens to you every time. Sometimes you have to lower your price because you are overpriced in your market. We're not saying always overprice.
Right.
That's not the point. But you can only charge what people will pay, and you really should find out what people are willing to pay, because that's what you need to charge.
Yes.
If this makes sense. Now we have this other piece of this, which is cost. Mm-hmm. We're going to ask you to think through a lot of these questions about cost. We're going to ask you, in addition to 3 questions at the end, you need to spend the time asking yourself the tough questions. What are my fixed costs? Now, for you in your business, you can work off your computer.
Yep. Yeah, the fixed costs are minimal. You know, it would be a percentage of total cost when you include electricity in my home and internet and all of that. So you'd have to divvy up some percentage of that, but in my situation, I'm paying the internet bill regardless. I'm paying the electric regardless. So there really is very minimal fixed costs in terms of someone looking to market, to help small businesses with their marketing.
Now you might, crass commercial plug here, you might decide to turn some of that into a variable cost and say, you know what, I'm only going to work on my business when I have a client, and so I'm going to do it at the Covation Center, which is a co-working space, and so I'm only going to pay $15 a day for days when I'm working with a client, because that's what you pay for a daily rate to come into the Covation Center. So you may look at that as a variable cost, and you only pay as much as you need to when you're working with a client. So it's a variable. It changes with the amount of work you're doing.
Right.
Or you could say, I've got so much work that the Covation Center is a great deal at $150 a month,
there you go.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I'm going to absorb that fixed cost because they have internet, they have electricity, they have heat, they have air conditioning. That's a crass commercial plug. I get it. It's week 4. I get to throw this one in here, right? Guys, don't forget to click the like button on that one. But these are the types of things we have to think about. What is the equipment that's involved if you're going to open a restaurant? There's a lot of costs, there's startup costs.
Sure.
You have to pass all sorts of inspections.
Yeah.
And
Continuing inspections. Yeah.
So which ones?
I said continuing
Yeah,
inspections.
continuing
too.
inspections too. And you have to invest in all the hardware that goes in up front, and redesigning the facility and getting the vents, the venting and the exhaust systems and the stoves, and all those are fixed costs and upfront costs. And then there's ongoing fixed costs, as you mentioned, the utilities, paying your bookkeeper might be a monthly fixed cost, paying for internet or those sorts of things. So we look and we talk about what are your expenses now, startup expenses and ongoing expenses, what are the fixed ones? And then as you have customers come in, that's when we talk variable cost. How much does it cost you to serve a meal? How much does it cost you to spend your time working on a client if what you have is a service?
Yeah.
And so those types of variable costs become important as well. So you need to think through what's fixed, what's variable, because as you increase your business and more customers come in, your costs will be going up.
Right.
It might be minimal, it might be extensive, but your costs are going to be going up.
And one thing too, in terms of the variable costs, some of them are billable. If you think of a plumber or an electrician, some of the parts and stuff are billable directly to the customer. But for vehicle costs, that's a variable expense that you can't pass on directly to the customer.
And that gets to another thing we actually don't have on the slide here, but it's kind of important to talk about: direct and indirect costs. Fixed and variable are often confused with direct and indirect, and we're not going to dive too much into direct and indirect, but there are direct costs, those things directly associated with putting a plate of food on the table. How much did the asparagus cost? How much was the steak that you cooked? And those sorts of things. But the indirect cost might be washing all the dishes, or having a cook that's cooking all the meals at once. And so those are kind of indirect costs, but directly related to the service, but not to that particular plate. And we don't go into much about that. That's for you and your accountant to talk about as you work towards your business. But we want you to understand all these costs. The big picture is, what is it going to cost you today, tomorrow, and every month to run this business? And what happens when you grow? What are some of the other costs? And some of them we don't talk about are incremental. So if you grow your business and you price it correctly, you're pricing it for more than it costs you. Are you pricing it enough? Are you valuing your time enough that you could pay somebody else to come in and work with you? So as work doubles, do you have enough money coming in to pay somebody else? Because a lot of small businesses, if this is you, we need to talk. A lot of small businesses will say, oh, I'm just doing this while I'm sitting at home. My time isn't worth all that much. And you underprice your product significantly. Go back to the pricing conversation, because you're pricing it on cost, not pricing it on value. Simple rule of thumb, we call this a heuristic in the academic world. A simple rule of thumb is that you want to charge more than it costs to make something.
Pretty basic, but
we're not a high-tech startup. We're
Right.
not here to lose money so venture capitalists can fawn over us.
Yes.
We're in the business of making money because we're in the business of doing this sort of thing. So then it gets us to this other concept of revenue and profits. Profit is often heard as a bad word. I don't get that, because here's what I think about profits. A profit means you get to pay your rent, you get to put food on the table, you get to put gasoline in your car, you get to pay for your kids' dance class or football team. Profits are what you have to pay you so that you can live your life. Profit is not a bad word. And people need to understand that. Even
Yes.
not-for-profit organizations need to make money. They need to have revenue in excess of cost,
yes.
so that you have this thing called margin. It's another word. If profit's a bad word, call it margin. But you need to think about how you're going to set this up, and how you're going to go about doing this, and what are your costs going to be, and what are you willing to charge, and what's the demand going to be, and how much revenue will you be bringing in? Because this gets to that next question. Will you be bringing in enough to make it a business? You need to understand a couple things. How much demand will there be for your product based on what your price is going to be? We know there's customers. We know what they're willing to pay. We know that what they're going to pay is more than it costs us to make it. Will it be enough demand there to put money in our bank account in sufficient quantities to allow us to succeed, to allow us to live. If not, but you think the business has the potential to get there, then there's some great opportunities, and we can have some conversations about how you structure your business to get you started while you work somebody else's job. And that happens a lot. Hey, I've got people working for me right now that have their own business, but they're working for us at the same time because they're working on their other job. But the best thing I can do for my employees is prepare them to either have their own business and be successful, or go be successful with someone else because they've learned some amazing skills here. So those are things I think about, but all of that can only happen when you have margin sufficiently enough to pay people, to pay yourselves to get things done.
Yeah.
Bumper sticker.
Yeah, right.
A business without profit, it's a hobby. It's just something you do for fun. You might love it, and I'm not discouraging you from doing a hobby. Photography is my hobby. And I would love for somebody to buy my photographs, but I don't delude myself into thinking I'm going to make money with photography. So we got 3 questions. This whole conversation is about as real as we get about this thing. You've got your great idea. It's all vision. It's all highfalutin strategy stuff. In this one, these 3 questions are designed to get you to dive right into the can I. This is the can I set of questions. So the first one, what is the value you think customers place on your product? And remember, we talked last week about the best proxy for your customer is a customer. So find out what your customers or potential customers are saying about products like yours. And if your product is different, if you can differentiate your product from someone else, find out what that means. Does it mean they'll pay more, or they'll pay less but buy more of it? Those sorts of things. So the first question is, what's the value you think customers place in your product? And as you said, how many of those can you sell? Because if you can't sell enough, you're not going to be able to eat.
Yeah.
And then the third question, tied into all of this, what are your fixed and variable expected costs as you move forward? Now I'm going to ask you to take these 3 questions, and if you've been working the 3 questions in the previous 3 weeks, that would be 9. This is questions 10, 11, and 12. Write them down, put them in a notebook if you're doing this. If you have a significant person in your life that you're sharing these conversations with, take time and talk to them about these questions as well. You want to get as much feedback from people important to you as you can on these questions. Now next week, we're going to actually talk about branding. Week 5 is going to be all about branding, understanding how to talk about what you do and the price, the value that we've established.
Yep.
Talk about the value, and it's going to be Dave. It's going to be the Dave show next time.
That's right.
Talking about branding the product as we get ready for week 6, where we're going to wrap all this up and we're going to drive home week 6 is, okay, you think you've got a good thing, you've answered all the questions, and you feel comfortable with week 1 through 5. You think you can do this. How are we going to kick this out the door? Week 6 will be the one that helps you get your business started and rolling out the door. Now, if you're as excited as you should be about what we've done so far, weeks 1 through 4, don't forget to click the subscribe button. Don't forget to give the thumbs up on the like button and hit the bell, but I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. As you're looking at this and you're watching these videos and you're hearing what we have to say about how you can grow your business, share our videos with your friends. At a minimum, share it with your friends so they can tell you, these guys nailed it here, these guys want you to think about this, or these guys missed it on this other point. And we want you to have them look at this, and maybe they'll be inspired by you and us to start a business on their own. But even more importantly, put your comments in the comment section below, letting us know what's working for you, what's not working for you with your business, or as you move down this process. Share your answers to these questions. Dave, I think you said it best. If you share your answers to your questions, other people might have thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole purpose, right? It's a community of, ideally, small business owners. So collaborate, grow with the other people that are following along.
We appreciate you joining us. We appreciate you staying with us this long. And we look forward to talking with you here and in the comment section next week.